if you just do it, it'll turn out okay. Unfortunately, I have COVID right now, so it's not that okay. But I am feeling a little bit better. But how's my guest doing today?
I definitely don't have COVID, so that's good. Really sorry to hear that you got COVID. This last this last week has been pretty crazy on like the international news front. But other than that, I've been good.
Yeah.
And we're here for a much less heavy topic today than the last time I was here.
Yes. Well, it's still about an invasion, but not with less guns and tanks.
Well, is it really about an invasion? We'll answer that here today.
Welcome, everyone, to the arrival of the Anglo Saxons.
Yeah, I'd like to actually ask you a question to begin this off. What ideas do you have about the Anglo-Saxon invasion? Like, what do you think happened?
Well, just from what I've read and heard from other places. I have heard. I saw a thing where the Brits invited some of the Anglo Saxons over here, over there. They invited them to come over to where they were to help protect them from the northern people.
Well, and also the Irish, but yeah, pretty much.
And then they're like, over here. They're like, we like it here. We're gonna stay.
Yeah. Worst deal in the history of deals. But yeah, I think that this is a perfect period because we don't know much about what happened actually. If any part of Europe actually went through a dark age, it is England during this time. And this is actually a perfect place to talk about how we learn what happened in history, how that brings in shortfalls into our understanding of what happened in England after the fall of the Roman Empire, and also a little bit of how archaeology and other stuff is helping us try to figure it out.
All right.
So, how do we do history? History.
We write it down or we draw pictures of it on cave walls.
Yeah. A lot of people think history is just recitation of dry facts and dates. Can you actually go to the next slide, please?
I suppose I could.
But that's not actually. History is more of a method than it is learning about dry recitation of facts. Most of the time, when you're in a history course, yeah, you learn about the facts, but you're also doing different assignments to make sure you know how to evaluate sources and know what sources to look at. So the biggest, like the if you've got like a hierarchy of sources that you want to use in historical research, the highest, like where you've got the king and feudalism, is the primary source. The primary source is an artifact, document, diary, manuscript, autobiography, recording, or any other source of information that was created at the time under study. So any books written at the time, that's a primary source.
Yes. And plus, I just say this. Sometimes it's also nice to have if you can. If it's not always possible, but to get the sources from both sides of the equation. Like like you get sources from the Anglo Saxon side, sources from the people that are invading side, so you can have a full picture of what's happening.
Yes, that is pretty important. How and
However, sometimes
that
sometimes
actually
sorry.
falls that actually falls under the historiography thing more. But yeah, you need your primary sources. The problem is that
Sometimes
usually,
the winner only the winner gets the right stuff down.
yeah, well, that, and also usually what historians use when we do history, well, I shouldn't say we, I just have a degree in it, but yeah, usually what you do is you look at literary sources. But for Britain during this time, you only really have one good literary source, and he's not even that good. So mostly what you have to do is look at archaeology, the archaeological evidence, even though it it's not as perfect either. And the problem is that before we started using that stuff, and when we took the words of the historians directly, we actually had a very biased look at how this occurred, and in a way you might not expect. But so secondary sources are like the next. These are
People that weren't
secondary.
there are people that weren't there, but that might know someone that was there.
Actually, it's a document or recording that relates or discusses information originally presented elsewhere. So most of your big history books, like the book I was reading to research for this, the Anglo-Saxon world, that's a secondary source. Bede for this period is a secondary source, but for the periods around the time in which he is writing, he is a primary source. So a secondary source can change even between things. Chaucer would be a secondary source for much of the stuff he's talking about, even though most of what he's talking about didn't actually happen. Uh, but yeah, he'd be a secondary source. Tertiary sources, these ones, don't cite them in a history paper. Do not. These are encyclopedias and dictionaries. Um, just a collection of secondary and primary sources to have the information down, and like Wikipedia, for all the crap it gets, it's actually pretty good. But it's a tertiary source. Usually if you're going into a subject you know nothing about, you can go to Wikipedia, find out the base information, and then go to the different sources and get deeper information. But one of my favorite parts about doing the history process is historiography.
Ooh.
Historiography is trying to get into the headspace of the person writing your primary or secondary source and critiquing them, finding their biases, and using that to make an argument for why you're correct, and to ensure that the reader knows the biases, especially of primary sources. So we're actually going to do a little historiography, if you go to the next slide, about our different sources.
Okay. Number one is this guy.
Gildas. Gildas is our only true primary literary source from this period. You have some little writings that might be from St. Patrick, but it doesn't really talk about what's going on. You do have this Gallic Chronicle, but it's mostly talking about what's happening in modern day France at the time. And all it does is say, yeah, a lot of Britain got conquered by the Anglo Saxons. So Gildas's book is On the Ruin and Conquest of Britain, written sometime between 490. Oh, I am very sorry about that. Written sometime between 490 and 550 CE, so we don't really know. And he's not trying to write a history. What you kind of, there's no chronology to what he's doing. And what he's trying to say, which is something Bede actually reflects in his writings, is the British people have left, have strayed away from God and gone towards wealth and stuff like that. And that is leading to their ruination at the hands of the Saxons, essentially.
So this guy was a monk?
Yeah. Well, most of the people writing stuff at this time are monks. Because they're your literary class.
Only ones that could write, besides maybe you're not royalty.
Interestingly enough, later on, Alfred the Great had to teach himself how to write, and so did Charlemagne, I'm pretty sure. So yeah, not even the royalty knew how to write. They just had people along with them that they used to write things. But yeah, it's a polemic. Essentially, he's trying to say, crap's gone bad because we need to go back to God, and that's why everything is happening. He does talk about some battles that occurred. The Battle of Mount Baden, which, for those people that think that Arthur is a real person, that is a. They think that's one of the battles he fought in.
Wasn't that the name of the Queen's dead husband in England now?
Oh, are you thinking of Boudicca? Oh, no. You're thinking of Mountbatten. No, this is This is Mount Badon.
Oh,
But
okay.
Mountbatten is something else, based on German. But
Okay.
no, that guy's not alive anymore. Prince Philip died.
That's why I said his. That's why I said her dead husband.
Oh, I didn't hear that. Sorry. What's more interesting about Gildas is that he is writing during this period, and that he's writing in really good Latin. He's clearly had a Roman education all the way in the late 5th, early 6th century, when you'd think that all influences of Rome would have been gone by now. But we've clearly got some vestiges of Rome because Gildas was
or
able
at least the Roman Church, not the Roman government.
Yeah, but Gildas had a Roman education.
Yes.
And there were clearly apparatuses that remained. The next guy kind of looks a lot like me, doesn't it?
Right. It's you.
So, Bede is actually writing in the 8th century. He's writing in like the 730s, and there's actually 3 books that he writes about this early period: the Greater Chronicle, the Lesser Chronicle, and the famous one, the Ecclesiastical History of the English People. So essentially, he uses Gildas a lot. He also uses there was this saint. Oh, I forgot what his name was. Well, there was this saint that came to Britain, and in the story about him, the part where he's in Britain only lasts a couple of lines and just essentially says, yeah, there was still a road system. There was still like a government to ensure that this guy was able to do what he was doing, and request him to come because there was a big problem with a group of heretics called Pelagians, I think. Yeah, Pelagians. And apparently this saint led a battle against the Saxons and won. So he uses that, but he mostly builds off of Gildas. So essentially, but he's trying to write a history. So he's trying to get the chronology out of Gildas where there is no chronology, which is a problem. And he also weaves in some news stories, like the various different kings that founded the Anglo Saxons. He's the one who talks about Hengist and Horsa for the Jutes. The founder of the Mercians is Echel. The founder of Wessex, and this couldn't have been somebody from Germany because his name is Celtic. So that's one of the reasons why you know this person's not a real person. Cheredich is actually an anglicized Celtic name. So he couldn't have been from Germany, and he couldn't have come over to form the Kingdom of Wessex. But this is the supposed ancestor of Queen Elizabeth and the English line. So he's working with scraps. He doesn't really have anything. But he's not actually a fan of these early English. He says that they only do what because they're pagans at this point. He says they're only able to do what they did because the British went away from God. Essentially what Gildas says. And a lot.
So, question real fast. So, is Bede writing about the time he's living in now, or the time that the previous guy was living in?
He's talking about a time before he's living in. So he's talking about when Gildas was alive.
Okay, so not his own time then.
No. He also writes about his own time, but this is like the beginning of his book, talking about, because he's trying to get the entire history of the English people. So
okay,
yeah. So this is his more secondary source time. An interesting clue for later on is that he says the only thing differentiating the Britons from the English is language. The Britons speak Brythonic and the English speak English, and that's the only thing differentiating them. I don't think it's important to talk about the biases of him right now because it doesn't really factor in. But
he was very biased.
Yes, because he does not like Mercia, and he really likes his home of Northumbria. So that's essentially because they were rivals when he was alive. Mm-hmm. So that's it. That's all we have for literary sources. Our non-literary sources is going to be mostly archaeology, and we have some genetic evidence as well, and language and place names differences. So there's clearly a change in material goods, but these material goods do have an influence from both Germany and from the Isles, which later Anglo-Saxon, true Anglo-Saxon material goods definitely have a blend of these things. And if you're thinking that there's a massive migration, you'd think that there'd be some depopulation so that the newcomers could come in. But there's little evidence of this. There's little evidence of any depopulation. Like there's no forests growing back or anything like that.
So is this picture a flood, or is this buried under dirt and stuff?
This is a Grubenhauser. So essentially what the Anglo-Saxons like to do is they like to build houses that were slightly underground.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so these are the most common building found in Anglo-Saxon settlements and evidence for other sorts of sunken featured buildings. You do have evidence of halls, but these are much harder to find because they don't seem to be like dug into the ground. They just seem to be like these big buildings, and so it's kind of hard to tell where they are. The genetic evidence is a little confusing because the mitochondrial DNA suggests no population change at all. So the people that were living there before are still living there after. But the Y chromosome data does have some similarities, surprisingly, to the Basque region of Spain and France, and also just Western Europe in general. But mostly from the Basque region up to Western Germany. And if you know anything about mitochondrial DNA, you only get that from your mom. Y chromosome, you get that from your
from your
dad.
dad, and only if you're a boy.
Um,
I don't think you unless
I
you might
think
get it from
no, I
your
think that's only the mitochondrial DNA. You only
no
get that from your mom.
no is it Y chromosome through the
Yeah, yeah, okay, yeah. So what this might suggest is a sort of apartheid system where you have some newcomers coming in, taking all the women and stuff like that. But some of the archaeology doesn't really support that either. So more research needs to go into that. And then the language and place names. A lot of place names change. You do have some place names that keep very Brythonic sounding names. Northumbria is actually made up of two different kingdoms. The northern one is Bernicia, which is a Brythonic name, and the southern one is Dyra, which is also a Brythonic name. Um, you have people with later on, a king of Mercia is named Penda. That's clearly a Brythonic name as well. And the legendary founder of Wessex, Cheredich, that's related to Caraticus, which is a Brythonic name. But most cities, a Grubenhauser, it's a Grubenhauser. Yeah. I'm trying to get my German in. I don't know if I've got it right. You'd have to ask a German person. He might be like, "No, you got it wrong." But hey, um, only a couple of settlements keep their earlier names. London is a big example of it. Kent also largely keeps its name as well. Kent is that kingdom. I'll show you in the next thing because it'll be there. But yeah, so this suggests population change or a high status for the incomers, like a prestige class, like you want to be that, and very little. There's very little. You definitely have loan words coming into English, but very little. One of them is a lot of settlements will end their name in Weech, W-I-C. That comes from Latin. Weech comes from vicus in Latin, and it's usually used to mean a settlement. So, Eovorweech, which is York, is a good example of that. And then you also have Chester, which modern day Chester, that's where it gets its name, comes from castrum, which is fortification. But other than that, you don't really get much loanwords from Brythonic or Latin into this language. So, from all of this, let's try to figure out let's try to figure out our history. But there's one last thing that I do want to talk about, which is very important for how the settlement occurs, and that's the next slide.
And that is geography.
Yes, this is a topographic map of the British Isles. As you can see, in the north, you got a
Mountains.
bunch of mountains. You have, which is the Scottish Highlands. You do have some lowland areas there. It's called Lothian today, but I don't. It's between the Scottish Highlands and the next mountains. The mountains in the middle. Oh no. Oh my gosh. Why am I blanking on the name? You see, Wales is very mountainous as well. The Pennines, the mountain range that goes from Scotland all the way down, is called the Pennines. So you notice a trend that in the west it's more mountainous, in the east it's more flat and valley. And that is not all. The flat and valley areas is not only where you get most of the Romanization from when Roman Britain was a thing, but it's also where you get the most Anglicization from the English migrations. So a lot of the more Roman parts of Roman Britain get conquered, which yeah, but the parts that stay very British and don't fall into English hands until much later, they're far more mountainous, less fertile. I wish I knew how I could point this out, but there's some areas in here that are just boggy swamplands that especially during this time. So Kent is that little dongle in the southeast. That little dongle. That's the only thing I know how to call it.
That's just funny because that could mean something else in today's thing.
It's the place closest to France.
I know you said Kent's a little dongle.
Yeah.
Inside joke for people that don't know what we're talking about.
I guess I don't know.
What?
No, it doesn't matter. But yeah, so now let's get into our actual history. Hello, shipfish.
All right, so, come on.
So Roman Britain.
Back to the time when they invaded, and that black line up there is the wall, I'm guessing.
Yeah, that's Hadrian's Wall. What the wall in George R.R. Martin's A Song of Ice and Fire is based off of. So your original invasions of Britain actually happened in 55 BCE by 55 BCE by Julius Caesar. Somewhat successful, but not really. He essentially invaded because he said some Gallic leaders were fleeing, because there were actually a lot of Gallic tribes that had recently moved into Britain at the time, and he said that these tribes were essentially harboring some Gallic leaders, so he has to go get them. He nearly gets his army destroyed both times. He gets out of there, but after that, economically, Southern Britain especially is tied to Rome. So you actually get early Romanization during this time, especially amongst the elite and the monarchies in the area. You start seeing Roman coins and all of that.
Yeah, and I see a city called Londinium. I never happened to that city. Never heard of it before.
Becomes London.
And it never it faded away from existence to never be important ever again.
Yeah. Actually, a lot of modern cities are on here. Camulodunum is modern day Colchester. Eberacum is modern day York. I think I can't. Glevum right there. That one is Gloucester. Um, so these are the bases of a lot of modern cities. Um, when the Romans finally show up in the first century, it's essentially because there was a coup in Rome. You had the first crazy guy who was Emperor Caligula. Oh, yeah. So a lot of the names changed during this period with the coming of the. So Eberacum to York is actually a 3-stage process. You have Eberacum, and then when the English arrive, it's Eovorwich, which actually means Boar City, which is kind of weird. And then when the Vikings come in, it becomes Jorvik, and then you finally get York out of that. Um, some of a lot of these cities, they lost their names because they were completely destroyed. They were completely abandoned, and then later English settlements sprouted up in these areas, and they had new names. Yes, Boar City. So there was a coup in Rome. Caligula actually originally goes to invade Britain, but it ends up not happening. There's a lot of speculation as to what happened and if he actually declared war on the sea and stuff like that. Um, that's not for this video. And then his uncle Claudius, who actually had a limp and a stutter, I think, becomes emperor. He was never supposed to be emperor, but he was the only one that they didn't really kill out of the imperial family when they overthrew Caligula, because like
That,
he didn't
that was
really.
that Claudius.
Yes, Claudius. And Claudius decides he's going to do what Julius Caesar couldn't, so that he can cement his position on the imperial throne. And he invades Britain. And all the escapades that ensue. I think so. I'm not sure. Because there was another Claudius, but he's less famous because he was one of those emperors in the crisis of the 3rd century. So there were like a million emperors at the time, and his name was Claudius Gothicus. But this is the much more famous Claudius because he's actually a good emperor who didn't die. Because Claudius Gothicus is actually a good emperor, but he died. Well, eventually this Claudius did too, but yeah, that's not important. So probably, yeah. So he shows up. Originally, originally Roman Britain was centered around what on this map is called Maxima Caesariensis, but these are later subdivisions that
This
occur.
was around the time of this is when that Boudicca thing happened.
Boudicca happens under Nero, which
Okay,
is
later, next emperor.
yes. Um, Funnily enough, Claudius had a son named Britannicus who was supposed to become king. I mean, not king, emperor. Oops. Oh no. Who was supposed to become emperor, but then um Agrippina the Younger, who was the wife of Claudius and also his cousin, I'm pretty sure. Who is his second wife and not the mother of Britannicus, but the mother of Nero. Uh yeah. She kills Britannicus, and then later Claudius, and that's how Nero becomes the emperor. Yes, Boudicca is really cool, but we also don't know much about Boudicca, sadly. Because I wish we could know a lot more about her. She actually burnt down Camula. The original capital of Roman Britain was Camulodunum, but she burnt it down. She also burned down Londinium, but they decided to build back up the new capital at Londinium.
So for her, the capital of London today still might be Candimium, Candum then.
Yeah, modern day Colchester. It could have been. You can actually go to I'll just make it all up. A lot of historians do that, yes. And that's why primary sources are sometimes hard.
Primary fanfiction sources.
Yeah, sometimes they just make stuff up, you know? Like the whole story that Aeneas is the founder of Rome and all that. Well, not the founder of Rome, but you know.
What that's the guy I think I've heard that. He escaped from the Trojan War and founded Rome or something.
Yeah. The Britons actually thought that they originated from another person that fled the Trojan War, Brutus. They thought they were the descendants of Brutus, interestingly enough. So more made up history.
There's two. I've heard two off topic real fast. I know, but so now there's two random Roman origins. They came from the city of Troy. The other one is two random twin babies came out of nowhere.
Yeah, the twin babies. The twin babies are descendants of Aeneas.
Oh, okay.
They're Romulus and Remus. They're the actual founders of Rome. But Aeneas, he's the progenitor of the Latins, who the Romans are a subset of. But that story doesn't happen until the reign of Augustus. We are getting way off topic.
Back to Britain.
So Britain was always on the fringes and was never really conquered. So you always had to have soldiers there. So the economy became extremely focused on the military. In the highland zones like Wales and the Pennines, it's about resource extraction for the army, while in the lowland zones, the richer zones where you get more Romanization, it's about bringing stuff not only to the army but also to the different imperial administrators that come in, getting them like the wine they want and the other goods from the rest of Rome. So that's why you get more Romanization in these lowland zones where you have administrators and stuff like that. So they want their lives to be as Roman as possible, but you still have a lot of Britons staying Britons, so like Brythonic, which is the language of the Britons. It stays the common language, and a lot of people either only spoke Brythonic or would speak Latin to the people they needed to speak Latin to. Also, compared to other provinces of the Roman Empire, there is very little like documents from this time. I think only I don't really remember. I just know that it pales in comparison to a province like Africa, like by a couple times, like multitudes. Africa has multitudes of documents. You could drown in them, while the British ones would only be up to your ankles. And
you could wait in them.
Yeah. And a lot of the cities remain small in comparison to the other the other provinces. The only real city that ever gets to like the status of a Gallic city, which Gaul is France, by the way, just to make sure you can actually see it. Gallier, is London, of course, because that's the main administrative capital of Roman Britain. So you never really get full Romanization, and most of the Romanization sticks among the aristocracy and the people living in the cities, which becomes a problem later when you want to actually have Rome, like if you want Britain to go the same way France did. So some bad things happen. Rome. So the 3rd century of the Roman Empire,
The
is
third
really,
century crisis.
yeah, it's really bad. Just endless civil war, endless.
Wait. Did you ever see the third century song about this? About the Roman stuff? I gotta share this with you then real fast. One second. Keep on talking.
So the crisis of the 3rd century sees a mini collapse of the British economy because the troops weren't in Britain for a lot of the time. You still had to have them and because of that, lots of bad stuff happens. You get the Picts coming down. The Picts live in modern day Scotland. They like doing their little raiding stuff, and you get a mini collapse in Britain. But after them, the Romans are, and even for a time, Britain was underneath another empire called the Gallic Empire, which was a breakaway state of Rome. But eventually it gets reincorporated into the Roman Empire, and this is one of the first times where Britain decides, I don't want to be part of the Roman Empire, and rebels. But then the Romans destroy the rebellion, and then they're forced to, and then they're like, okay, Rome, come back. We like you again. We're getting raided and stuff. Our economy's collapsing. Please come. Please come.
But they couldn't because they were being invaded.
Well, they do come back, and that's the Dominate, which is the next period, but can't really go to the next slide when you're looking for a video. Oh, okay. So you actually get a reorganization of the province. Those provincial borders in the last slide were actually from the Dominate. So you get 2 main capitals at this time. You have Eboracum, modern day York, and Londinium, modern day London. The Duke of, I'm pretty sure. Oh, never mind. I don't know. But you have 2 dukes essentially. No. The York one was a duke, and the commander of the Saxon shore was a count. Never mind. So you get the Saxon shore because you actually get raiders coming from what will become the Anglo Saxons coming across. So you actually have to have fortifications built down there. Oh.
Sorry. There. And my friend connection disappeared.
Okay.
Welcome back.
Yeah, okay. So are we going to watch that video now or later?
Yeah. Now since we're in that part, this is really funny. I gotta show it to you. I hear it or not.
It hasn't started yet.
Let's see if the audio works. Tell me if you can hear it or not.
I can't hear anything.
And
A one, 2, 3. Them Rome's.
I can hear it. Yeah, I can hear it.
What? Okay.
I can hear it. Yeah.
Rome's gonna Rome's gonna stab around. 3rd century Christ is going around. Let's count. The emperor's down. First got committed. Soon son. These guys in charge 3 months. But then they got killed by Praetorians, and I had a pretty good run. But he died in battle or by treason, and that's just the first 6 years. The next emperor died fighting this dude who battled with and got screwed. Then his son took away was shrewd. Died of plague. The next one got murdered by his own. Months later it happened again, and then came Emperor Valerian, captured by the Sassanids. Well, Valerian forced to drink hot gold or skinned alive, depending how the tales told. His son ruled 15 years and got trolled. It's conspiracy murder again. His successor died after 1 year, and who killed the next is unclear. But things evened out because here comes Aurelian.
Yeah, Aurelian.
And there's the song.
Aurelian. He doesn't actually end. He doesn't actually end the 3rd century crisis because he eventually gets killed too. He just reunites the empire after it's split into 3 different pieces. The guy who actually ends it is a guy named Domitian, but yeah, and he forms the Tetrarchy, which is the rule of 4, which doesn't really. He actually doesn't die as emperor in 305. Oh.
Pause. Okay. And he's done again. Welcome back again.
Back. Yeah, so Domitian actually doesn't die in office. He resigns in 305 and forced his so, okay.
Yeah,
so
the topic.
Tetrarch...
Yeah.
Yeah, well, it's kind of important because actually, because Constantine, but you have 2 Augusti and 2 Caesars. The Caesars are the junior emperors, and the Augusti are the senior emperors. Mm-hmm. But yeah, eventually one of them is the father of Constantine the Great. You know, the guy who brings Christianity to Rome, and he actually ruled from Britain. So
this is affecting what we're talking about now.
Yeah, Constantine is actually crowned emperor in York. So this is another example of the British Legion saying, we don't like how things are going. We're going to make our own emperor. And then the emperor leaves with all the troops, which is bad.
Come back. We need you.
Yeah. Yeah. So constant rebellions are depleting the military. You even get a whole barbarian conspiracy in 367. Although it's most likely that this was overblown because the dude who put it down was the father of the current emperor while the guy was writing the book. So it could have been overblown. And you start seeing the elites leaving the cities. They don't want to live here anymore. The cities are, they're becoming magnets for raiders and stuff like that. We're going to move to our rural estates.
They're like, hey, all the stuff and treasures and gold are in these cities. Let's go there.
Yeah, and these rural estates become mini cities, and they're like, these are the hotbeds of Romanization at the time. But still, You don't get it far out from these areas. And military service. So military service. Yeah. Thank you, Shipfish. That's good. The original way the Romans recruited their military was you had non-citizens who wanted to become citizens, so they would join the army as auxiliaries. So at Hadrian's Wall, you will have multiple, which was built in 117 CE, by the way. I totally forgot about that. But you'll get various different peoples from various parts of the empire that go there because they want to become citizens. There's actually a story about a I think he was an Ethiopian who was serving in the Roman army to become a citizen when one of the emperors, Septimus Severus, came up and was like, "Oh shit, this guy's a bad omen because he's black." Yeah, he was racist. Surprise.
Da, da, da.
Which is actually funny because Septimius Severus was the first emperor not descended from a Roman family. He was descended from a Syrian family and a Carthaginian family. Funnily enough, Carthage actually won in the end.
Carthage got revenge by putting one of its own on the throne.
Yeah, he wasn't from Carthage. He was from Leptis Magna, but he was from family descended from the Phoenicians, so he was Carthaginian. I'm just gonna call him Carthaginian because it's cool and more poetic. But then, actually, Septimius Severus's son, Caracalla, destroys this system by proclaiming every single person living under the empire is now a citizen, which did really bad things for recruitment. But now everybody.
Yeah, because before, I think if I remember correctly, before, if you have to give citizen, not already, you have to join the army for so long, and then you're a citizen, and so are your descendants.
Yeah, and as Romans became more prosperous, they wanted to become part of the army less. Stuff like that happens. You start getting the Roman Empire. Recruiting mercenaries into the empire to be the soldiers. That's where you get people like Alaric, who eventually sacks the Roman Empire.
Which are only loyal as long as you can pay them.
Yeah. A lot of the times, especially later in the empire, you'd pay these mercenaries by giving them land, which becomes the basis of many of the kingdoms that spring up after the fall of the Roman Empire. And military service in Britain actually becomes hereditary, which is interesting. But you get multiple different times that a person proclaims himself emperor. Well, yeah. If you're talking about Caracalla, he was an absolute prick, and he ends up getting assassinated. He killed his brother because he wanted to be the only Roman emperor, and yeah, I'm pretty sure he said he died because he said he wanted to go take a piss, and then the Praetorian Guard shivved him. So, yeah, he did learn consequences. Yeah, you get multiple different rebellions. One of these emperors, Magnus Maximus, actually is talked about in Welsh annals later in history, seen as a great conqueror and a great person. But this starts depleting the military quickly. And the final one the one that finally leads to our next slide, which is sub-Roman Britain.
What's it called? Sub. What's it called? Sub.
I have no idea. I don't know.
And I know it's after. I know it's after Britain, after the Romans left mostly, but like, I have no idea where the sub came from.
Mostly because there's still like some Romanness to it for a bit, maybe.
Okay.
So you still have a bit of Romanness to it until a much later date. So the final one is Constantine the Third. Constantine the Third. He rebels. He goes to Gaul to become emperor in 407. He becomes co-emperor for a bit in 409. I'm pretty sure he's assassinated by the Emperor Honorius. And the Britons were like, okay, when are the Romans going to come back? And they just never do.
They're like, they never taught us how to fight. What are we going to do?
And this is a bad time for the Romans to not come back because, of course, you've got Saxons coming in from the south and the east. You have actually the Irish coming in from the west. And the Irish might have actually founded multiple different Welsh kingdoms. Including the kingdom of Dyfed, but that's a different story. And then the Picts from the north, and you actually get an Irish kingdom in Scotland. That's a very important one because the Irish tribe that invaded Scotland is known as the Scoti. Yes, the Scots are not, Scottish, Gaelic, and all of that, they're not originally from Scotland. They're from Ireland because the Irish are awesome and better than the Scots. Oops. Oh, no. I'm totally kidding. So, yeah, the Picts also start overrunning Hadrian's Wall. You actually get evidence of kingdoms based in and around Hadrian's Wall. There's one place that you can look into called Burt Oswald that has examples of this. Yes, I am on thin ice. Oh no. Yes, both are good. The Irish are superior. Paganism seems to have survived actually to this time, but as like a substrate. So that might explain why the transition from sub-Roman Britain to the pagan Anglo Saxons was a little bit easier because a lot of the Christians were the higher ups and they were the ones who fled the area instead of stay because they were like, ugh, these pagans, oh, I have to leave now. And a lot of them actually flee to Brittany, modern day Brittany, and that's where you get that and stuff like that. So there's evidence from Gildas that there might have been one ruler at some point, commonly called Vortigern, but he never called him that. That's a later name given to him, and we don't know if he's actually a real person, but he's the original guy. He's given the you're the one who called the Saxons over to come help us. But why did the Saxons have to come? A bunch of Romano-British aristocrats actually went to Gaul. Have you ever heard of Aetius?
I have not.
Aetius is the guy who defeated Attila the Hun. He is the last. It's actually GERN, but close enough. You nearly got it. But so Aetius was one of the last good Roman generals, and he had defeated Attila the Hun. He eventually gets assassinated, but the British come to him and is like, hey, can you come to Britain? We really need your help. And he's like, no, I can't. We're a bit busy dealing with...
We got land.
The empire's crumbling. We can't really come and help. Really sorry about that. So they hire Saxon mercenaries. Now the story is, the Saxons decide, oh, we like it here. We don't know if that's what happened. It's possible that's what happened.
That's my headcanon.
Yeah, but they definitely would not have been led by two brothers named Hengist and Horsa, because Hengist and Horsa means horse and stallion. And in Germanic folklore, you actually get this idea of twin horse deities, essentially. So a lot of people today in the field believe that Hengist and Horsa aren't real people. They're just, incarnations of these horse twins, essentially, because of their names. They are seen as the first kings of Kent, and they're seen as the Jutes. So I guess we should talk about the different groups that come in. According to Bede, the different groups that come in are the Jutes from northern Denmark, the Angles from like the Danish-German border, and the Saxons from just below the Angles. Yeah, no, I know. Kent. Yeah. Kent Hovind.
And I know the three kingdoms in the south are from the Saxon, the Wessex, the Sussex, and the Essex.
The Saxon kingdoms, according to Bede, is Wessex, Sussex, and Essex. West Saxons, South Saxons, East Saxons. The Angles were Northumbria, Mercia, and East Anglia, and the Jutish ones. He says that there were Jutes on the Isle of Wight, and Kent was also Jutish.
So Kent's a Jute.
Yes. But there's very little evidence that this was actually this actually went down this way and if anything, there had to have been some Frisians that came over, because modern day Frisian is the closest linguistic relative of English.
Did you say Friesa came over?
No, Frisians. They're from modern day Netherlands.
I was hoping that an evil space emperor came over to Little Britain.
Yes, and he spoke a language very close to English. You'll actually see in more modern maps about the Anglo-Saxon settlement show the Frisians come in as well. Yes, Frisian is really cool. It's very much like you're looking at Old English, but not really. It's interesting. So if you go to the next one,
it's Old English.
Well, them and Old English have a common ancestor called Anglo-Frisian. A lot of the so it's called palatalization, where your cuz become chuz, and your scuz, like in skeep, become sh for sheep, which is ship, not sheep. Sheep would have been pronounced sheep in Old English. Yeah. Yes, Frisian is the legitimate half sibling. Yes. So what we can kind of see is the Britons were in this area were probably assimilated and not conquered and forced off. We actually even have evidence that Britons from Wales decided to move to the Anglo-Saxon area to become more prosperous because the West sucked at this time. And the only thing you really needed was a Germanicness. You had to speak Anglo-Saxon like an Anglo-Saxon. You had to look like an Anglo-Saxon, because if you didn't, there's actually this thing called weregeld, which is man price.
You got killed or something.
Yeah, if you get killed, they have to pay. They have to pay. Yeah, someone has to pay for your body because you got killed. A Briton's weregeld was half that of an English person's weregeld. So how the Anglo-Saxon society was set up is you have these various war bands roaming around. You probably didn't have very big kingdoms. Each little settlement was probably its own little kingdom at this time. They might have had some affinities with the other ones. Who knows? You could have had Jutes, Saxons, and Angles all right next to each other and in areas you wouldn't have expected them. We don't know the actual ethnic makeup down to that, because
and the ones that didn't want to be incorporated or merged together, they went to Brittany and France.
Actually, they would become slaves essentially. They'd become part of the household. But you do have people fleeing. You do have Britons fleeing west and also to France, which is modern day Brittany, to get away. That there had to have been, because why does Brittany speak a language closely related to Welsh if people didn't flee there? So, if you didn't want to become like essentially part of the household, you had to act like an Anglo-Saxon and try to fool the Anglo-Saxons into thinking, oh, he's one of them. And this is why Bede probably says that the main differentiation between these groups is probably language. Because, see you, Nebulon. Because that's how they distinguished each other, and through the material culture. And that's why you see a complete turnover in the material culture. This is just a hypothesis. We don't know. But you have these different war bands going around. The different settlements are their own little societies, kingdoms, and they're made up of chorals, which means free. Charles is actually related to the word Cheoral, but it comes through French. But Cheoral is also related to Carl. It just means freeman. These freemen, essentially, each had their own little household where they could have various different people living underneath them. And then they would elect their leader from amongst the Cheorals to be the warband leader. And this is your Anglo-Saxon society, little tiny polities, and not these big heptarchies that come up later that people talk about. And yeah, that's essentially how it goes. And you just get the kingdoms later. You don't get the people. You don't get Hengist and Horsa coming in and forming a kingdom. Echelf coming in and forming a kingdom. Cheredich coming in and forming a kingdom. You just have a bunch of people coming in to take land. So the Britons were probably assimilated instead of outright conquered.
They were bred out.
Yeah. Or they decided, I'd rather become English than be a slave.
and 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 everything was happy and peaceful until the time that till the Vikings attacked.
Well, actually, you have more.
I was just joking about that. I'm pretty sure it
Oh,
wasn't peaceful at all. But
oh yeah, no,
but
it wasn't.
but then after this was the time of the Danelaw, I think.
You so after this, you get the formation of the kingdoms that are normally called the Heptarchy.
The 7.
Yeah, the 7 kingdoms essentially. Northumbria, Mercia, East Anglia, Essex, Kent, Sussex, and Wessex. Even though Sussex and Essex really didn't do much, I don't know why they're included. Sussex was pretty early on conquered by Wessex, but hey.
Yeah, and Wessex is the kingdom that eventually gave rise to the full English throne later on that we have now.
Yeah. The Anglo Saxons, if you can see up at the top, actually settled modern day Edinburgh. So you have 2 languages in Scotland. You have Scottish Gaelic, which actually comes from Ireland, and you have Scots. I have the controversial opinion that if you're going to say the northern dialects of English are dialects of English, then Scots is also a dialect of English. If you're you can't but there's geopolitical stuff that means that the people who speak Scots don't want to be seen as a dialect of English, but they are. Yeah. So essentially what I was writing was wrong, and this is how it actually happened.
It's good to know you can admit mistakes.
Well, I was writing way afterwards. We had all these myths and stuff. I just had to write it down, man. That's actually a very good way of thinking about it. Shitfish. Scots is a linguistic dialect, but a political language. I like that. After this, you get the formation of the kingdoms and consolidation of these little tribal polities, and yeah, language is a dialect with the Navy. I like that. Even though Scotland isn't technically independent, but they're fierce people. You don't want to mess with them. They'll shout freedom at you and charge you. It's not good. But yeah.
And that's the end of the story of how the Anglo Saxons came here. Or came there. I keep saying here, but there.
To England. Yeah. So these different households held by the churls eventually become a pretty important system under later kingdoms called the Hyde, which is just different land allocations and how you split up your kingdom essentially. But yes. So yeah. Nice. This is what we know now. Any questions? Because that's all I have.
Q&A time for those in the audience. And me too, I guess. Do you why? Okay, here's a question for you, and not because it's not really about the invasions later on. There might be a different topic for a different topic, maybe. I guess I ask anyways. Why was and on the maps I've seen? Why was Northumbria usually the biggest kingdom?
Because it's 2 kingdoms that you'll have to watch another episode, Mackenzie.
Right, guess
That'll be the next episode, Mackenzie. But so Northumbria was made up of two different kingdoms, Bernicia and Deira.
All right. Cool.
Well, they affect the modern world because today England is not made up of Britons. It's made up of English people. You have a complete, and this is the beginning of the enmities between the Welsh and the English and the Scots and the English and all of that jazz.
Yeah, first the Anglo Saxons took over, and then the Danes came over, and then the Normans came over.
Yeah. To your question about the Northumbrians, it's because it's made up of two different kingdoms. Eventually, they just unite later on. That's why. That's
okay.
That's essentially it. I do want to say, I did forget to talk about this. The main reason why, so in France, you actually keep a lot of the Roman institutions in place that when the Franks come in, the Germanic peoples come in and take over, they use a lot of the Roman aristocracy that remains and keep them essentially as administrators. They're the kings. They're going to go off and fight the wars, but they need the Romans that are remaining. And eventually, the Roman people that live there are still the prestige group. So you eventually get the Germanic peoples assimilating into Roman society. You don't have that in Britain because all the administrators left with Constantine, and the administrators here were mostly Brythonic after that. You don't have the Roman society remaining to be there so that
to be a subset of the Latin, and that's why Britain's not a subset of Latin like French is. It's a subset of the Anglo Saxons.
Yeah, and that the Welsh don't speak Romance language because the Roman administration was never really entrenched into Roman Britain, like it was in the other places, and it's probably because Britain kind of sucked for the Romans. They didn't really like it. You can't grow wine there.
They couldn't build a road. They couldn't build a road to Rome. A boat. No bridges. Or no, they didn't have that. They didn't have the channel built yet back in Britain days.
Surprisingly, though, the roads that the Romans built in Britain, they still have their legacies today in the roads that we have in modern day England, because they actually largely survived. But yeah, that's also why you don't get major Anglo-Saxon kingdoms right off the bat. You just don't have the structures like you did in Gaul that the Franks used.
Can you imagine if the Romans did build a channel like we have the Romans built that channel?
Oh yeah, that'd be I don't know how they do it, but that'd be cool.
But then I guess that would really probably help with either the invasion or the protecting Britain later on.
Yeah. I don't know. We'd be speaking a Romance language, I guess. I don't know if one little channel would help out that much, especially when
It'll help with trade probably.
Yeah. Also,
I heard at least it's not important now then because there's the iron and stuff, but I heard back in the Bronze Age, England was a good source for tin.
Yes, and that's usually what they extracted out. That's what the economy was based off of in the West. You actually get a complete breakdown of trade. The further into sub-Roman Britain you get, There's a possibility that the plague of Justinian had something to do with this, but there's no real way to know because we just don't have any literary sources from this time. There are plague victims that you do see, I'm pretty sure, in Britain, but yeah, just trade completely was gone by like the 600s, which, yeah, was bad. And that's trade was literally the only thing linking Rome to Britain, and once that's cut off, there's no point.
Oh yeah. So, all right. So, whenever you research the next subject, what do you want our next subject to be?
Probably up to the Vikings, maybe.
So we're going from when they arrived to when the Vikings arrived.
Yeah, the formation of the actual kingdoms and how that happened, and then, the different things that happened between these different kingdoms up until the Vikings said, "What's up, guys? How you doing?"
Their loves and their wars.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, it's like a roads and cars. That reminds me of something I heard one time. They say in Europe, the cars were built for the cities. Here in America, the cities were built for the cars.
Oh my gosh. I don't want to get into my stances on cars here, man. Don't bring up cars, man. I don't want to. I'm surprised I didn't get any questions about Arthur.
Oh, okay. I'll question. Was he put to be a Briton or an Anglo Saxon?
Well, I don't believe King Arthur existed.
Well,
so.
duh. Like Robinson.
I don't think that there was a historical basis for Arthur. I think that Arthur was more of an ideal. His name means bear warrior or something like that. Something that just sounds a little bit too much like he's an embodiment of what a warrior is supposed to be, and later on he gets placed onto figures like the guy who won the Battle of Mons Badonicus, which is
apparently he wasn't a very good husband or lover or husband, I guess, because his wife kept on leaving him for one of his knights.
If you want to learn more about the story of Arthur, I was actually listening to a pretty good video that says that wasn't originally in the story. By the Histocrat. He has an entire video on Arthur. But yes, I think Arthur was more of an ideal, and later people tried to find historical figures. Ambrosius Aurelianus, who was a Romano-Briton commander, who we know very little about, but he won some battles against the Saxons. A lot of people try to say that he's Arthur. I just think Arthur was more, imprinted onto him afterwards than he's Arthur. But yeah, we don't even get the first literary evidence of Arthur is well into the time of the Welsh kingdoms. We don't have him in Gildas and we don't have him in Bede, so I just don't think he existed.
Too bad. I want to pull that sword out and become the true king of England.
Yeah. I actually want to look up the etymology of Arthur. Yeah. It most likely comes from bear. Bear man. That's what it meant. Bear man. Arthur is bear man in Welsh. So Yeah, he just seems more like a, embodiment of what a warrior is supposed to be. He could have been a figure in Brythonic mythology as well. We don't know much about Brythonic mythology, sadly, because the Romans, they tried to make Celtic religions look as Roman as possible. So, it's impossible to know, but yeah, I'm on the side of Arthur didn't exist. But check out that video by the Histocrat.
Will do. And if you have anything coming up on your channel do you have a channel that you own?
No. You still watch my grandpa's video, please, guys?
yeah, go to his grandpa's channel then.
Crash Martin.
But next week, I'll have a guest, Jay, talking about the digital evolution. Not sure what that's about yet, but we'll find out next week.
Digital evolution?
Apparently, that's what he wants to talk. Can't talk. That's what he wants to talk about.
Okay, well, I'll have to figure out what that is.
All right. In the meantime, never stop learning and enjoy the randomness. We'll see y'all next time. Bye.